Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome in. Jason Priester, the Clemson Insider. Doing it a little different tonight. We had to do a little rearranging some makeshift stuff going on here tonight, but we'll get it in somehow, some way. Appreciate everybody that is tuning in tonight. Before we get started, I want to thank our sponsors over at A Glass for when you need a glass. Take care of all your auto glass needs. They do replacement, repair, 2 locations right there in the PD, one in Florence, one in Sumter. Give them a call today or get yourself a free quote. myaglass.com. Busy weekend, man. Very, very busy weekend. It's the busy time of the season, at least for me anyways, especially when you got baseball regionals going on, official visit weekend going on, and they're kind of converging and all going on at the same time, especially on Sunday. That Sunday's always a busy day for me. Not sure the baseball season could have ended any worse than it did, but if I would have sat here and told everybody 2 weeks ago that Clemson was going to get blown out in an elimination game, I'm not sure anybody in here would have been shocked. Not the way they had kind of played coming down the stretch, some of the stuff they've been dealing with the injuries. Me and Ashby talked about it ad nauseum on the baseball show last week. They had to stay out of the losers bracket. Couldn't do it. Kind of gave one away late Saturday night there to West Virginia. I was not a big fan of, not that I didn't, I understand why you take Garris out there in the 8th after he gives up the hit, but I was not a big fan of bringing Mostad in there. Find somebody else. I think McGovern had been getting warmed up. Bring him in. You had back-to-back lefties coming up. Mostad has really struggled with lefties lately, and for the second night in a row, first pitch, boom, off the wall, run scoring double, game's tied, and he goes on to get lit up. He has just had so many issues with the lefties lately. They just kind of sit on that fastball, and he threw one on the very first pitch. And the guy tattooed it. Lucky it wasn't out of there. Not, it turns out it didn't matter. But, it kind of is what it is. I understand taking Garris out when you took him out, particularly knowing he had been hurt and you weren't planning on using him for more than an inning. Just not a big fan of who you brought in to replace him. Kind of the second time in the last 3 years now, Backett just kind of pushed the wrong button late in the game there with it on the line. You go back to that Tennessee game when they took Grice out in the 9th inning and Hammonds comes in and gives up the home run to tie it, that sends it in. Or I think it tied it, and they ended up going on to play 14 innings or whatever it was. But just a brutal way to lose. And then they come out yesterday and just kick the ball all over the field. 7 errors, man. And this is a team that had been pretty solid defensively for most of the year. Even Listy had an error yesterday, and that guy's about as reliable as they come in the field. But once again, the struggles at the plate rear their ugly head. The lack of depth, the pitching depth rears its ugly head. And, again, you had to stay out of the losers bracket. Start looking ahead to next year now. News broke earlier today that Ethan Darden's entering the portal. Can't say I was overly shocked by that news. Kind of been forewarned it was probably coming. There'll be some more guys. Jackson Cole entered the portal today. Luke Brown entered the portal today. 2 young guys who just haven't played much. There'll be some more, and the team will look a lot different next year. You got some holes to fill, guys that are out of eligibility. You got to replace guys like Canarella, Listy, Reed Garris, Moss. I mean, there's a lot of spots that'll need to be filled. So it's going to be an interesting offseason. And no, I am not on the fire Eric Backich bus or fire Nick Snobble bus or fire Jimmy Bellinger bus. Or I'm not No, we're not. Not even close to being there. Not me, anyways. When a baseball coach takes a job, matter of fact, I was talking about this yesterday with Qual at the game yesterday, and we were talking about how when a baseball coach takes a job, he's usually 2 years behind. This is his third year, which means this year was his first recruiting class, and he had to go to the portal to fill a lot of holes for this year. And for whatever reason, only one of those guys panned out. You know, Dominic Listy. He was really the only one that kind of met the preseason expectations. Colin Priest ended up making third team ACC. He had an okay ACC slate, but he was feast or famine. More than 25% of his hits were home runs. So I mean that kind of tells you exactly how feast or famine he was. He had a pretty solid on base percentage, but man, in the bigger moments, he tended to strike out. It just didn't work out for Luke Gaffney. Michael Gillen, the transfer pitcher they brought in, they thought was going to be a big part, been hurt all year. The other transfer pitcher they brought in, Luke Kissenberth, I don't pretend to know what kind of role he was going to have, but they thought they would be able to get, to rely on him in some situations this year. He's been out all year. So, I mean, it was just a portal class that just didn't help. Josh Payno leads the country in strikeouts. The guy is like 90 strikeouts on the season. That's like almost double anybody else on the team. Give me 1 second. I'll tell you exactly how many he had. Ended up being 87. I shouldn't say almost doubled than anybody else on the team. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but he had 87. That was, far more than anybody else on the team. Nobody else even had 70. So, and he was another guy that really struggled over the last few weeks of the season. So we'll see what they do. We'll see what Backus does in the portal this year. They're going to have to fill some holes, and he's going to have to go to the portal to do it. Particularly anxious to see what he does maybe when it comes to adding an arm or two, because I think that's, if you stay fully healthy all year long, you might have just enough depth, just enough. But it's sports. There are going to be injuries, and the number they had this year, they certainly didn't have the depth to overcome them. So you got to have more than what they had coming into this season. So big offseason there. He was pretty adamant in his post-game presser yesterday that he was taking this program back to Omaha. This fan base, man, they are starving to get back there. It's been since 2010. It's been a long time coming. Last year you were so close, you could taste it in the super regionals, and then the way the last month or so of this season went, minus that little run there in the ACC tournament. It kind of feels like you've taken a step backwards. So I think it's a big offseason for the baseball program. I think next year is a big year for the baseball program. But no, I'm not on the bandwagon of cleaning the house and firing coaches and all that. I still think you got the right guys in place. Jimmy Bellinger hasn't forgot how to coach pitchers. He's had a lot of success at some of his other stops, including Florida State. Just sometimes it takes more than 2 or 3 years to get where you want to go. So we'll see what they do in the offseason. Big recruiting weekend. I think there was 16 uncommitted guys on campus this weekend. The 2027 offers have started going out. Sammy Brown's little brother Max gets one yesterday. The 5-star linebacker, or he used to be a 5-star. He might not be he might be a 4-star now. Caden Henderson got an offer yesterday. A couple of offensive linemen got an offer today. One of those was a 5-star, Kennedy Brown. Then you have Matt Luke's son kind of coming out of nowhere and getting one of those opening offers and it was only his second offer. He had a offer from a smaller school. I forget who it was, South Alabama. I forget which school it was, but he had one other offer. It was a smaller school. This was his very first big offer, be it, G5 or Power 4. I don't spend a lot of time on message boards, but I'm sure they were blowing up with the cause for nepotism and all that stuff. Matter of fact, I talked to him on the phone today, and he is very anxious. He's going to come work out at camp. I think it was tomorrow, he said, and he is very anxious to kind of show that he can play, and his last name doesn't, his last name is not what's going to be what defines him. So we can take it anywhere you want to go, man. I wouldn't get too worried about nobody committing during the weekend. I would be willing to bet there are going to be several guys that were on hand this weekend to end up being part of this class. It's just a large majority of them are just they're going to take all their visits. That's kind of where we are now. There might be one or two that decide to shut things down and go ahead and jump on board, but a big majority of these guys are going to follow through and take the rest of their visits. I don't know what is worse, the run defense, the first tournament loss, the NCAA tournament loss, the way baseball looked the other day. Yeah, it was not the postseason has not been kind to the big three of the Clemson sports this year. The first round playoff loss at Texas, the early exit at the NCAA tournament, courtesy of Will Wade. And then, losing the regional. And that's the second time in 3 years that Clemson's lost a home regional under Backich. He's got it on to be a host in each of his first 3 seasons. And, 2 of those, they have gone home early. And if you go back, a little bit further, they've lost 6 of 7 home regionals. The only time they got out of one was last year. I don't know how fair it is to, hang that on Backich, seeing as he wasn't here, but still 2 out of 3. And you could tell yesterday during his post game, how down he was. But I also, there was something he said yesterday that really stuck out. And some of you have probably seen the quote. He said, look at our stats. If you just looked at our stats, there's no way you'd think this would be a 45-win team. And, those of you that watch the baseball show, we've kind of talked about that a lot. The lack of there's only like 2 guys on the roster hitting over 300. Heck, a month ago, Cam had dip below 300. It's just not a lot of pop in the lineup. And the fact that he squeezed 45 wins out of that team, I think that says something about the staff. Personally, I do anyways. But back to your point, no, it's not been – the postseason's not been very kind to football, basketball, and baseball this academic year. Who will be left? I don't know yet. I think you're still going to see some more departures. And most of them will be most of them will be guys that are kind of looking for playing opportunities that haven't had those at Clemson yet. But there's probably going to be one. We've already seen one in Darden. A couple that aren't about that because they've had plenty of playing opportunity already. I can't. I can't tell you why Darden's leaving. I had kind of caught wind a few weeks ago that he might test the draft market. Maybe he still does that, but we'll see. I do tend to believe that 2 of the weekend rotation slots are probably already filled up for next year. Not sure he was a guy that was going to be the 3rd, unless it was by default. which he's kind of filled that role some in the past couple of years. And for the most part, he's filled it pretty well. He's had some inconsistency here and there, but man, he was good before he started dealing with that pec this year. But we'll see. I think, a guy like LeGrunick, who slid into that Sunday starter spot after Dane Moeller got hurt before the season started, and then, just for whatever reason was ineffective. He had that good outing against North Carolina at ACC championship, but I mean, there was no pressure. Clemson was already down big. He got lit up again yesterday. I would probably say he's a candidate. We'll see if any of these true freshmen that redshirted this year or played very little decide to bolt. Maybe there's one or two or a redshirt freshman who redshirted last year and still didn't play this year. And there's a couple other I'm keeping my eyes on. I'm not going to say any names because just I don't know what they're going to do yet. But I mean, there are a couple of candidates I think they are worth watching. But it's going to be a different looking team regardless next year because you're going to have a lot of holes to fill no matter what. You lose your third baseman, although I think, you have a Josh Castellani who you would hope is able to kind of slide into that role next year. You're going to lose your shortstop. You're going to lose your center fielder. You're going to lose your left fielder. We'll see what Jake Gerald decides to do. I'm pretty sure he's got one more year of eligibility left. Whether he decides to use it, we'll see. But, I mean, you're talking about about half the lineup there. And then there's a guy like Luke Gaffney who didn't play, the last couple of weeks of the season, except for a pinch hit against North Carolina after the game was over. I'm not sure what's going on there. I haven't heard any details about what happened. I know Backett said something about him tweaking a hamstring. But does a guy like that stick around since he hadn't played the last 2 or 3 weeks or whatever it's been since the first game of the Pitt series? The only reason he played in game 2 was because Gerald needed a day off. I mean, so he hadn't been really seen since the Pitt series. So, I mean, there's going to be some retooling that needs to be done. And if the 34-man roster limit is implemented before next year, you got to trim some guys anyways because they have well over that on the roster this year. So yeah, I mean, again, it's gonna be an interesting offseason, man. And Package was saying yesterday they've already started scouting the portal even as soon as it opened. Was Darden entering the portal surprising? Not to me. I mean, I'm sure it caught some others off guard, but I mean, I kind of caught wind of that a few weeks ago, so I was kind of expecting it. Some guys just, again, I heard that he might, test the draft and see what happens there. And if he doesn't like what he hears, then he'll come back, but not to Clemson. And obviously we all saw that play out today, but some guys just maybe think they would benefit from a fresh start somewhere else. Some guys maybe think that their role is not going to be what they think it should be. I mean, it could be a lot of things. I mean, I don't think there's anybody that's watching this or listening that would say that there doesn't need to be some improvements made to that pitching staff. And to do that, you probably have to lose a couple of guys, not just the ones who are out of eligibility, because you gotta make room for them with the new roster limits that are coming, and you gotta have, the money to pay them, and if you're paying. And I'm not saying this is what happened with Darden. I'm just using him as an example. Let's just say you're paying Darden, starters money, and you don't envision him starting next year. I mean, it's a different world now. But no, I was not surprised. Heard Dabo knocked it out of the park again. I've talked to some of the guys that were on hand this weekend, a couple of them in depth, and I say the same thing every year. Nobody does official visits kind of like the kind of the way Clemson does. They did some study. They did some fishing and stuff on the lake Friday. They played some games and some I forget what all the specifics were. They played some games and stuff, like they broke off into teams and it was like a competition. On Saturday, went to Dabo's house Saturday night, shot some hoops, did a big breakfast Sunday morning. But yeah, they killed it with some of these guys. It doesn't mean you're going to land them all, but the visit hit the mark with every guy I've touched base with, even if it was only, via a couple of text messages. I've had a couple of them on the phone, but I've talked to a few of them via text. Again, like I said at the top, I fully expect several of these guys to end up being a part of the class. Now they might not pop off this week. They might not pop off next week. It might be July before they pop off. But yeah, I think they hit the mark with some of these guys. You've seen anybody that follows recruiting. I'm sure all of you have seen I think there's been multiple crystal balls for Leo Delaney to Clemson. A month ago, I probably would have said Clemson's not a favorite to land that guy. I would probably be giving Tennessee or Michigan better odds. If there's a guy that's going to pop off soon, it might be him. He's a guy I think they knocked it out of the park this weekend with, based on a conversation I had earlier anyways. I could easily see him being one of the small number of guys that might shut it down and go ahead and jump on board. Clemson's already got 4 offensive linemen committed, and they're probably going to take 2 more. And if one of them's Delaney and then you get a second from a guy like Carter Scruggs, who's kind of been trending towards Clemson the last few weeks, you start talking about, is this the best class of offensive linemen Clemson's ever signed? Because they've already got 4 4-star guys in the boat. Leo Delaney might be the highest rated guy of them all if he ends up jumping on board out of the entire class. I mean, that's a heck of a group of offensive linemen. I touched base with Tyler Atkinson yesterday, and he just raved about the thing. If you want to see what he said, the story's on the site. I can't remember all the specifics, but I remember he called it amazing. And he was the only linebacker there, so that way you're able to not only tell him he's a priority, but you can show him he's the priority. I think Clemson's in a good spot with J.R. Hardrick, the kid that just got an offer 2-3 weeks ago to defensive end. We'll see if he takes any more visits. He's still supposed to get to Louisville and Georgia Tech. Still waiting to hear about Jay Lamar. Haven't heard much about him yet. I've reached out to somebody, but I've yet to hear back. But yeah, they did what they tend to do on these weekends. And I guess knock it out of the park is about as apt as you can put it. What's up with so many pitching injuries, conditioning, coaching, throwing too much in offseason? Why does it seem to hit us worse than most, even under my – I can't tell you why, but it's not something that just reared its head this year, man. It goes back to Monty and the Andrew C. days, and I know, I used to – anybody that knows me, and I was doing this, this was pre – me getting on here and talking to you guys every week, but anybody that knows me personally knows that I was not a big Andrew C. fan. Nothing against him personally, but it just seemed like guys didn't get better under him. several seem to regress, and all the injuries. And maybe it was unfair to maybe blame him for those injuries, especially now that we're seeing them still happen. Um, the common, the same guy's been running the strength and conditioning program for baseball forever. I mean, he would be the common denominator there, but I can't say that's what it is because I don't know. I don't know. I don't know enough about how they work out and how they condition and all that. I do believe this. I do believe that Bakich is a really bright guy, and if there's a problem, I feel like he'll address it. Now, that doesn't mean whatever he does to address it ends up working out, but I do feel like he'll at least attempt to address it if he feels like there's an issue. But it does seem to there is a trend for these injuries with the pitchers. I mean, it's not just been this year, and it goes back before Bakich, that's for sure. Rough day yesterday. Now we get to watch the roster bolt in the portal. What a time to be a college sports fan. Well, I hate to say it like this, but I'm just going to be blunt about it. There'll be some guys that leave through the portal that probably should have never been takes to begin with, not at a school like Clemson. It's way, as a fan of college sports, athletics, whatever sport we're talking about, baseball, basketball, football, man, it sucks to see the roster turn over year after year after year. You have to, learn new guys' faces and new guys' names every year. And Clemson's not gonna be immune to that stuff. But at the same time, again, it's a way to kind of purge the roster of some guys that probably are never going to play at a place like Clemson. Again, like I said earlier, when you're a baseball coach and you take a job at a new school, you're already 2 years behind when it comes to recruiting because that's just the way it is in baseball. So basically, this year was kind of Eric's first class. There's a lot of guys on this roster that the previous coaching staff recruited. Not all of them, but a lot. So he's still trying to kind of put his fingerprint on the entire roster. So, yeah, we're going to see some guys leave, and I think most of them will be because they've not, gotten any opportunities yet. Not all of them, but most of them will be, and they feel like they could maybe get one somewhere else. I mean, you look at a guy like Nolan Naraki, who I was extremely high on his first year at Clemson. Then he bolts and heads to South Carolina. Heck, he's already back in the portal. It's just kind of the nature of the business these days. We didn't get 6 or 7 instant commits this weekend from the official visit weekend. Sure, some will trickle in. Yeah, you kind of got that back there in the elite retreat, though. There were 7 or 8 coming off of that thing. 3 of them were offensive linemen. So you kind of got that already. Again, I think just most of these guys are probably going to follow through and at least take. I'm not saying they're all going to take all of the visits they have scheduled, but I think most of them will at least take some. And that's all well and good. You want to make sure they're sure, and the best way to do that is let them go out and see somewhere else. But a big part of why Clemson likes to do theirs this first weekend in June is because it's not the first weekend that schools hold official visits. Like there were a few that held official visits last weekend, but for the most part, the schools you're recruiting against, they're going to hold their big deals after yours. So you get them in first, kind of set the bar real high and see if these other schools can kind of meet that bar you've set in these kids' minds. And a lot of times they can't. Sometimes they can, but a lot of times they can't. West Virginia broke Clemson, literally. I don't know about that, but they've not had much luck with West Virginia. You can go back to the Orange Bowl and when that early in Dabo's tenure, where they just took Clemson to the woodshed. I think West Virginia eliminated Clemson in the NCAA tournament one year. Clemson basketball does hold an early season non-conference win over them. I can't remember what year it was. It wasn't that long ago. But in the postseason, they've kind of owned Clemson in the last 10, 15 years, whatever it's been. Blown out in ACC title game and regional, just brutal ends. 7 errors was something shocking. I'll take both of these in one shot here. Yeah, the 7 errors were definitely extremely uncharacteristic and happened at the worst possible time. But, we've been sitting here, and when I say we, I mean everybody that talks Clemson baseball. We've just kind of beat it like a drum, the how things have to go exactly right for the pitching to work out on the weekends. And when it doesn't, we know it. If we know it, those guys in that dugout know it. Like, let's go back to Sunday in Durham. Everybody in that dugout knew they were out of arms, and it's almost you kind of go into that thing maybe expecting the worst to happen because you've seen it so many times already this year. Kind of the same thing yesterday. If Talon Bell's not on, you're in trouble, man. And it was readily apparent pretty early in the first inning that it was going to be one of those days, even after you scored 2 quick runs. He gets 2 quick outs. He's thrown 10 pitches. And then all of a sudden, he's got a 20-plus pitch first inning. He hits a guy. Heck, I think he hit 2 in the first inning maybe. But he starts to kind of lose his command, and you're like, oh, here we go. And we don't really have anybody after him. They tried to bring in McGovern. They actually brought Dvorsky in behind Talon Bell. And I was wondering why they didn't bring McGovern in ahead of Dvorsky. But once McGovern got in the game, it was obvious. He didn't really have anything left after how much he pitched on Friday night. He got hit around. He's only been hit around one time since he came back from his injury. And he really didn't even get hit around that day. I think it was some errors that led to some runs, but I have to go back and look. But he's been lights out since coming back from his injury, and he just didn't have much left yesterday. And then after that, you got to go to guys like Chance Fitzgerald and Justin LeGuernick and the players in that dugout, man. They know that's all that's left, and they know what happens every time those guys come into the game. It's that's kind of got to be demoralizing, but the thing is, if you find some way to be competitive and win some kind of shootout yesterday, which, I mean, let's be real, Clemson's not really equipped to kind of win those shootouts. They just don't have the offensive firepower. But if you find some way to do it, West Virginia's in the same boat you are. They were out of arms too. I had a West Virginia person tell me after the game Saturday night that if Clemson somehow managed to beat Kentucky, that they might be in a good spot because the Mountaineers were out of arms. And as we saw last night after Clemson was eliminated, they had an offensive shootout and ended up being 13-12 or 14-12 or something like that. West Virginia had to late comeback to win it. I'm sure they weren't as out of arms as Clemson was, though. But yeah, the 7 errors was very uncharacteristic I saw back at, I think it was after the 6th inning, and this is something we haven't seen very much of at all in his tenure, but he grouped them all together there in the dugout. He brought them all into a huddle, and they stayed there for a minute or two in between that inning. And I asked him after the game what kind of what was the gist of that message there, and he said, if we're going, it was already lopsided. He told him, look, we're probably not going to win, but we're not going to lose this way. This is not who we are, kicking the ball around the field like that. So he was not happy with that either. I mean, when Listy makes an error, man, that guy has been about as solid defensively as you can be. And you go back to his throw from left field in the bottom of the first, and it skips off a runner and goes into over there, careens it past the on deck spot out of play. And umpires got that thing wrong, man. It's going to be, you just get this feeling like, here we go, that snowball's rolling again. I still don't know how they allowed a runner to score from third, but not allowed a runner from second to advance to third. You got to either let them both move up a base or neither one move up a base. Not that it mattered, but still. Baseball was horrible, showed nothing. Again, I thought they showed a lot of grit this season, man. I thought the fact that team won 45 games is a testament to, I think, how good that coaching staff is. Because like Eric Backus pointed out yesterday, man, if you look at the stat sheet, that is not a 45-win team. They were out of arms, man. And I'm telling you, if we all know it when they're out of arms, every guy in that dugout knows when they're out of arms. And they also know they don't have the firepower to go out and score 15 runs. They don't have that guy in the lineup that routinely changes the game with one swing of the bat. You look at a guy like Gerald, who he's got 15 homers, but go back and look at how many of them are solo homers because nobody's on base when he hits them. It's just kind of been the way this offense has worked this year. I do think they overachieved. I don't care that they were ranked number 2 in the country. I never thought they were the second best team in the country at any point this season. It just kind of worked out where they got ranked that high because they got on a little winning streak, and they were really good at taking advantage of other teams' mistakes and turning walks into runs, turning errors into runs. Opposing teams figured that stuff out midway part of the season, and they quit walking Clemson hitters. They stopped, walking Clemson hitters as much and started to play cleaner baseball, less traffic on the bases, less scoring opportunities. And when Clemson did have scoring opportunities again, then they just didn't have the bats, man. The numbers with runners in scoring position are just putrid. They were 0 for yesterday with 2 outs. I think they had 1 or 2 hits with runners in scoring position, and Kentucky hit like 600 or something like that with runners in scoring position. Could have beat West Virginia. It was right there for the taking. Yeah, it definitely was. They were fortunate to come back and beat Upstate Friday night. Because you take McGovern out, and I know a lot of people were unhappy with taking McGovern out there, which I understood why you got to do it at some point right there because you want to try and keep him available for Sunday. You don't want to burn him up all in one appearance, and he was getting right on that line. He was already at 40-something pitches, so he's right there. So you got to take him out at some point. I can't remember if he had just given up a hit or what, but it might have been because the righty was coming up. But you bring in Mostert, who's, outside of one time, he's saved every opportunity he's had. And first pitch, fastball, home run, pow. And then the next night, though, again, I understand taking Garris out. I did not like bringing Mostert in there. He's just had a lot of issues with lefties lately. And even Backage admitted that post game. He said, yeah, I know Mostert has struggled against left-handed hitters here of late. But this is what he said. He thought, or they thought, that the runner at first was going to try and steal, or either the hitter, that the left-handed hitter at the plate, was going to bunt him over. And Mostert is much better at holding runners on than Garris. So that was at least part of the thinking there. I never crossed my mind that the guy at the plate was going to bunt. He had already had some pretty good swings on the afternoon. You're one run down. I'm not bunting him there. I'm letting him swing away, and that's what they did. No, I would have rather seen anybody. Heck, you know, I get that McGovern had thrown 40-something pitches the night before. You only need one out right there. Let him come in, lefty, pitch to one guy, get out of it, be done. And then all you got to do, you need 3 outs in the ninth. That's probably one that will keep him up at night, over the offseason, just like I'm sure the decision to take Caden Grice out in the ninth inning of that game against Tennessee probably still keeps him up at night sometimes. Sometimes you push the wrong button, man, and he pushed the wrong button there. Yeah, they had 10 hit batters yesterday, if I'm remembering right. It's been an issue all year. Clemson pitchers hit 109 batters this year. 109. That I don't know. That number seems pretty high to me. Maybe I'm off the mark there, but that seems like a high number to me. That's a lot. It's a lot of free passes on top of the walks you already given up. Yesterday it was definitely up there. We did not have pitching to win the regional. We have had so many injuries with our pitching staff. They had enough to win it as long as they stayed out of the losers bracket. They have enough to win, for 3 games in 3 days. That third game gets a little hairy depending on how Bailey or Bell performs. But, I mean, you got enough for 3. But once you get past that, yeah, they didn't have enough to go through the losers bracket and win it. Well, I've been of that opinion all along. And, yeah, they had a lot of injuries, man, a lot. Dane Moeller, the freshman, he goes down a week before the start of the season. He's your Sunday starter. Already locked that job up. He goes down. Season-ending surgery. He'll probably be out the first part of next year, too. You slide Justin LeGuernick into that spot. Well, he proves to be ineffective. You got to slide somebody else in there. You slide B.J. Bailey in there. He works for a little while until he doesn't. But, yeah, on top of Dane Moeller getting hurt, again, you had Michael Gillen out. Might as well say he was out all season. He tried to come back, made 3 appearances, didn't look nothing like the dude he was last year. Luke Kissenberth, another transfer pitcher. I don't know exactly what kind of role he was going to play, but he has Tommy John not too long before the season, and he's done for the year. Talon Bell doesn't even debut until April. He's weeks behind. He's on a limited pitch count until about the last 2 weeks of the season. Freshman Brendan Bennett, he doesn't make his debut until late March, makes 2 starts. He's shut back down. Darden, your Saturday starter, goes down April 12th, never seen again. Casey Talent has to retire due to the injury he sustained last year that kept him out all of last season. So, I mean, the list goes on and on. Reed Garris missed the last several weeks, missed the North Carolina State series. Even McGovern missed a month there in the middle of the season. I mean, it's a long list of injuries, and I'm probably forgetting somebody. So I guess maybe you could add Noah Samole to that list, who's kind of started the season coming back from an injury, if you want to get real picky about it. But, yeah, it was a lot of them. Every guy Beckett's brought in yesterday got raked right away because there was nobody left. There wasn't anybody left. They needed Talon Bell to go deep yesterday. You know, if he didn't, all you had left was Dvorsky, he started out the season strong, but he's not been very good of late. And behind him, you had Chance Fitzgerald and Fitzgerald's gotten rocked of late. You had Justin LeGuernick, who's only been used when there was nobody else, and Luke Brown and Jackson Cole and guys like that, guys that Bakich has used on days when he's kind of waved the white flag. Those guys, same thing happened to them. That's pretty much happened to them a lot of times. They pitched this year with Dvorsky being the exception. He had a pretty decent first half of the season, but for whatever reason, I don't know, he ran out of gas or something over the back half. And they tried to go back to McGovern yesterday, but it was painfully obvious he was nowhere close to the dude he was Friday night. And, people, not you specifically, but, I saw so many people before the first game Friday, or actually, last week, moaning and groaning about why Canuck didn't pitch last Sunday against North Carolina. Well, that's exactly why right there. Because these guys, they're not professionals, man. These starting pitchers at the college level, they tend to get 7 days off every week between starts. Every now and then 6. If there's a Thursday, Friday, Saturday series, it'll be 6. You're not going to start them on 3 days rest. You're just not going to do it. It's not good. It's not what's best for the team. It's not what's best for the player. And what we saw from McGovern yesterday was kind of an example of why, because they had used him up Friday and they were hoping he'd be good to go yesterday, but he wasn't. I'm going to say something controversial, but I don't even think Canuck is an ace, at least not until he develops a third pitch. Got a lot of retooling to do, but I still believe Canuck throws way more than 3 pitches, and he's mastered more than 3. Last year he threw 3, and he threw 3 very well. He throws a 4-seamer, 2-seamer, a cutter, a changeup, a slider. Matter of fact, hold on, I can tell you exactly what he throws. I think that's all of them there, but let's see here, just so I'm making sure I remember this right. Four-seam, 2-seam, cutter, curveball, slider, changeup. So he's got 6 pitches. And they don't let those pitchers throw pitches in games that they've not mastered yet. So he's got more than 3 pitches. Now, if you want to make the argument that trying to add a few to his repertoire maybe slowed his progression a little bit, I might listen to that argument. I don't know that I agree with it, but I might listen to it. Canuck was pretty good for most of the year. He wasn't quite as efficient as he was last year. I do think some of that was working some of those new pitches in, learning when to throw them, when not to throw them, what situations to throw them in, and those kind of things. He didn't have a good outing Saturday. Sometimes they don't. You know, coming into the ACC tournament, if I'm remembering right, uh, I can't remember exactly when it was, but late in the season, his opponent's batting average was like 188. That's pretty good. I don't have it right in front of me what it ended up being, but the only thing about Canuck is he didn't go as deep into games this year as he did last year because his pitch count got up a little bit higher than it did last year, and I think some of that now was working in some of those other pitches. But for whatever reason, Saturday his changeup was not moving the way it normally does. It was staying up in the zone, and it was getting hit around a little bit early. So he had to start throwing some other stuff. But outside of that start against North Carolina State, you go back to middle of April, 2 earned runs, 1 earned run, 1 earned run. Then he gave up to 4 to West Virginia. I mean, he's not been quite as efficient as he was last year, but he's still been pretty good. But I mean, whether he's an ace or not, that's subjective. That depends on what your definition of ace is. I think Clemson's lost two. I can't remember. I shouldn't say, but they've never lost a game at Doug Kingsmore in which he started. Never. 2 years. Some fans want the Big Ten experiment to be over with. Is that valid? It's too small of a sample size. I mean, and you got to remember, both those guys, they're still underclassmen. They still got developing to do. And there is a big level up from the Big Ten to the ACC. I mean, that's a jump. And I think both those guys struggle with that adjustment for a lot of the year, and maybe even all year. I mean, it's too small of a sample size. I mean, there's, me personally, I'd probably prefer you stay with the boys that grew up in the Southeast because that's where the better baseball is played. I mean, that's just me. I hate painting with that broad of a brush and saying you can't get any players that are worth a cuss from the Big Ten because I just don't know that that's true. They took a flyer on some guys. I shouldn't even say took a flyer on because, both those guys won accolades at their school last year. One was the Big Ten Freshman of the Year. They just had problems adjusting to the level of play in the ACC. We'll see if they can, if they're either one of them, if they're back next year, which I assume at least one of them will be. I don't know about Gaffney. We'll see if they're any better next year. His team's picked on Cam's arm hurts his stock. I don't think his arm hurts his stock at all. At all. I don't think his arm is as bad off as you've made it out to be either. I saw him throw a couple of darts over the past couple of weeks of the season. He doesn't do it when he doesn't have to, but it's not like he had this rocket of an arm pre-surgery. That might be a little bit of revisionist history there, but I've actually, that's something I've paid kind of very close attention to since I think you brought it up 2 or 3 times earlier in the season. So I've kind of paid attention to it. And he threw a couple on the rope over the weekend, but he's not coming back. And whatever happens to him in the draft, it ain't going to be because of his arm. It'll be because of his bat. And if these organizations are as detailed and organized as we're all led to believe, they should be fully aware that that guy's coming off of a labrum surgery last summer that kept him from working out in the off season, kept him from hitting into fall. I mean, like no lifting, no nothing. Didn't do anything in the preseason. Just kind of started the season cold turkey pretty much. Once he finally got it going, then he looked like old Cam. His back gets getting extra heat from donors he needs to rely on. I don't know that he's I haven't heard any heat. Um, he hasn't. I mean, let's don't sit here and pretend like he's had all this NIL support over his first 3 years because he hasn't. Um, no school ever has enough. I'm sure they'll all tell you that, but that is an area he has struggled with. He ended up finding some late last year. Probably some of that was because they made it to the supers and people feel like they're right there. And, hey, if we invest, maybe we can get over that hump. If that's what happened, I'm just throwing a theory out there, but if that's what happened, do those same guys say, hey, well, we invested, you didn't go as far, we're not doing it again? That's something that's probably out of his control. If the team is materially worse next year when it's all packages recruits, then we might have a problem. Where is the freshman talent this year in the portal now? It's not going to be all packages recruits next year. This was his first full signing. This year was kind of really his first full class. These are definitely not all packages recruits next year. There'll probably be still plenty of Monty holdovers. There's a lot of guys that ended up signing with Clemson that the previous staff recruited. I don't know of any freshman that signed before the season that has hit the portal yet. Not off the top of my head. Now there might be one or two. I don't know. But what's Package supposed to do? Play a guy over somebody that has earned the opportunity to play ahead of that freshman? I mean, that's just kind of the nature we live. That's kind of the nature of the world these days, man. Guys don't want to sit and wait their turn and develop anymore. A lot of them want to play right now. There's one freshman's name who redshirted this year that I've heard bantered about that might be a transfer candidate. But I mean, I don't know of anybody he should have been playing over. This baseball is kind of it's not just like football, but it's similar. It's all about development. Not every guy is going to be Canarella coming out of high school. Some guys are going to progress while they're in school. Some guys going to grow into a really good ball player when he probably wasn't a really good ball player as a freshman, but then ends up being one as a junior or a senior. It's still all about development, man. Not everybody comes in ready to play. Like Clemson had. Go back to last year and go back to listening to some of Eric Backich's press conferences in the preseason, and he's talking about Devin Parks. Devin Parks and Jaron Purify were two of the guys he talked about the most. Well, Purify ends up playing and working his way onto the field. He gets opportunity and never lets go of it. Parks, not so much. He looked like a guy that needed a year, ended up having to transfer out. Right. Might have even been before the season ended. I can't remember, but there was it wasn't all about playing time and stuff. There were some other issues there, but not saying he got in trouble or anything like that. But that's an example of two guys that were kind of progressing at different paces that Backus thought had bright futures. Jay Dillard should have replaced Payne. Yeah, nah. If you want to replace Payno, if you want to make that argument, you're going to have to use Castellani, not Dillard. I love Dillard, man. He is what I would call one of those dirtbag ball players, man. He's going to go out there with a clean uniform, and it doesn't matter what happens. Even if he goes hitless, his uniform's going to be dirty when the game's over. He's just he's not that great of a hitter. And he also got hurt at Florida State. I don't know when he was available again after that. I know he was out for a little bit, but I wouldn't have minded of seeing Castellani getting a few opportunities when Payno really started to struggle over the last, I don't know, couple weeks, 2-3 weeks. He really started to scuffle. Shortstop from ECU. There's a lot of guys in the portal. Bunch of pitchers announced transferring. Tells me they have arms coming. I'd have to go back and look what they signed in this current class because I can't remember. I don't really I don't follow baseball recruiting as closely as I used to, but no, that's not what it's about. All three of the pitchers that have entered the portal today that pitched at some point this season, from my understanding, made their decisions weeks ago, and it had nothing to do with who was coming next year. It was more out, for Cole and for the tall kid. I forget his name. I had it a minute ago and I forgot it. But for Jackson Cole and Luke Brown, for those two, I mean, and this is not a knock on them, man. It's going to sound like one. I don't mean it to be. I just don't know that those are guys that are ever going to play at Clemson. No matter how they develop. Luke Brown's a 6'6", 6'7" guy that he barely throws 90. A guy that size should be throwing 95, 96, 97. I just don't know that those are big time Power 5 or Power 4 talents. I know that sounds bad, but I'm just trying to be honest. And with Darden, I don't think it's about anything about next year, to be honest. Stat you shared, final batting average. Every West Virginia batter had over 300 hours. Yeah, well, we knew they could hit. They hit the ball better than I thought they would. I remember when I was doing some research on those guys, I was reading some stuff on them, and I remember reading something that's saying both those teams were kind of similar to Kentucky and West Virginia were kind of similar to Clemson in regards to hitting. But then after I look at the lineup, after Clemson won and West Virginia won, I look at the lineup and I'm like, man, this is nothing similar to Clemson. So I go back and reread it. And what it's actually talking about was power-wise, not necessarily hitting-wise. West Virginia hits the ball well. They just don't hit a lot of home runs. But that was a good hitting baseball team. I did notice something about Kentucky. They were doing it in the first game there when they lost to West Virginia, and they were doing it again against Clemson in the elimination game yesterday. What's up with their manager or their head coach moving the on deck circle so close to home plate? And why do the umpires let him get away with doing it? Did anybody else notice that, or was it just me? You have to be an older, experienced team who stays lucky health-wise or pony up the money. Yeah, the latter part of that is very true, man. Most of the people griping about firing the coaches probably don't pony up a dime to help build the roster. Which I understand that. That's everybody's choice, and I'm not a big fan of asking the fans to bankroll a team like that through donations anyways. That's a different discussion for a different day. It definitely does help to be an older, more experienced team, though. That's for sure. But you had, you had some older, experienced guys on this team this year. Pano's been around forever. Chufo's been around forever. Listy's been around forever. This was Jack Crichton's third year. This was Canarella's third year. Gerald's third year. So, I mean, there was a lot of experience on this team. Maybe not so much pitching-wise, outside of Canuck and Darden. But as far as the lineup and the position players, there was enough experience. They just, they just turned – I don't think anybody going into the season before the first game was played envisioned this team being as bad at the plate as they ended up being. When you look at it on paper in the preseason, you're thinking, hey, this team's probably going to hit the ball pretty well. I know I did. I didn't think they'd hit for power the way they did last year, but I thought they'd hit the ball pretty well. But they didn't. Even Canarella went through stretches this year where he struggled. Purify was up and down. Listy was kind of the one that was the most consistent of all of them, probably. Luke Gaffney was, when he was on, he was just hitting singles for the most part. Priest was kind of feast or famine. Again, I think I said it earlier. I think about 30. Let's see. I got it right here. Oh, let's see right here. Colin Priest. He had 47 hits. 12 of them were home runs. So about 25% of his hits were home runs. That's feast or famine. And then Josh Pano couldn't even hit the ball at all over the past 2 or 3 weeks, man. He struck out. I think he led the nation in strikeouts. Yeah, I haven't looked up that number to confirm it. Somebody told me he led the nation in strikeouts. And we're talking about the middle of your lineup. Even Jarrell, who had the 15 homers, even Jarrell, who had the 15 homers, he had his struggles too. He was kind of feast or famine at times too. He ended up he hit 263, had the 15 homers. He had 52 hits, 15 of them home runs. But yeah, I really thought this was going to be a better hit team than it was. How did the visits for Atkinson and Lamar go? I talked to Atkinson last night. That was the first story that went up on the site this morning, I think. So I interviewed with him, but he raved about it, which he usually does. But that's a guy that plays things very close to the vest. We don't even know, or as of a little while ago, we don't even know yet where he's going to be this weekend. He's kind of kept that visit schedule very close to the vest. We all pretty much know Ohio State's going to get one. Georgia's going to get one. And Clemson obviously got one last weekend, but he's one of those guys that he's going to follow. If there's a guy that's going to follow through on all his visits, it's him. He's very hard to get a good read on because he's so complimentary of every school he visits. He says all the right things. He is well versed in dealing with media. Let's put it that way. I haven't got a lot of intel on Lamar yet. I'm still waiting on that. Talked to my guy last night, and he hadn't talked to him. I was supposed to get back with him tonight. I'm gonna do that after the show's over. But the last time Lamar visited Clemson, he comes out of that visit calling it his top school. So we'll see. And I will say this: I think Clemson's got a little bit of help there, in his circle. But I will also say this for both those guys: when they're both from Georgia. And when Georgia's probably your top competition or one of the top 3 schools, that's an uphill battle. I didn't even have to go on the message board to find it. There it is. I knew somebody was going to bring up Matt Luke's son getting an offer. I knew it. I don't see the big deal, man. That he's a good kid. I talked to him on the phone for a while today. He's a good kid. He went out at one of these rivals camps here a few weeks ago and had a very good showing. He killed it at Clemson camp last year. And this is not like your typical coach's son who's around a facility every day. Matt Luke's family lives in Georgia. He still goes to high school in Georgia. They try to visit him like twice a month. So it's not like they're around the facility all the time. And Dabo told him last summer that if he, after he did so well at camp last year, that if he kept getting better and kept progressing, he'd give him an opportunity. And he did enough over the past year to get that offer, man. And, you're going to get to a point where there's 105 players on the roster. Right now there's 140. Who cares if a coach's son's on there? You can't play with 22 at the time. If he turns into a player, great. If he doesn't, no harm, no foul. So listening to the post-game press conference yesterday, to me, it really felt like Backett was implying that he knows we don't have good enough players. Yeah, if you kind of read between the lines, he all but said out loud that the team overachieved. Again, you start talking about, if you're looking at the stats, that there's no way you think this is a 45-win team. And, no lies detected there. There's no team stats that are going to jump off the page at you. When you start looking at those things, you're probably thinking of a team that won 30 games, 32, 33 games. You're talking about a pitching staff who basically had 2 starters the whole season, couldn't find a third one that could perform consistently. Their top reliever, or they're not their closer, but their second most reliable reliever, misses the last several weeks, misses North Carolina State. The other guy they thought was going to be a big piece out there misses the whole season. And then he starts talking about how you need guys that can change the game with one swing of the bat. Yeah, they didn't hit the way most thought they would this year. Matter of fact, I don't remember anybody going into the preseason that was worried about the offense. I do remember some people, after the season started, worrying about the power. But I don't remember anybody talking about it before the season or worried about the team not being able to hit. It's baseball, man. Sometimes it doesn't work out. And, some of the guys that they were planning to rely on this year just did not work out. Which to me means it's kind of obvious. You got to have better players. If you want, and make no mistake, we know it. Fans know it. Media knows it. If we know it, he knows it. He knows he's got to have better players. If they want to get to Omaha, he's going to have to. They have to be better in spots than they were this year, and in a lot of spots. Mr. Negative here. Are we going to contain a top 10 football recruiting ranking? I don't know. I probably lean towards thinking yes, but a lot of that will depend on how many they end up with and how many other schools end up with, because so much of that depends on how many you actually sign. Clemson was winning national championships when they were signing classes outside of the top 10. I mean, I think there's way too much stock put on those kinds of things. They've kind of been at their best, I think, when they were somewhere between 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, something like that. I don't know if 10 should be the cutoff. If you start putting a bunch of classes back to back to back to back outside the top 15, then, maybe we got something to talk about. But until then, I wouldn't get too worked up over it. Always room on the roster for the coaches' kids got to give them proud dad moments. And you know what? On top of that, you want to do anything you can to ensure Matt Luke stays there. I mean, right? Same way you did with Venables' kids, man. And I'm not saying that's why those kids got offered. Tyler Venables had other offers. He could have went and played somewhere else. And I'm pretty sure Jake did too, if I'm remembering right. But I mean, part of that is, at least a little part of it is, hey, man, yeah, we want you to hear. We want your dad to stay. I mean, I can see that side of it too, but I do really believe they think the kid can play. There's been some players that have come through there that have been termed 5-heart guys or Nepo guys that ended up working out. Not all of them. Some of them do. And again, if for whatever reason he doesn't work out, it's no harm. I don't really see the harm in it, to be quite honest. And I mean, if a third of your roster or a third of your 85 scholarship spots were dedicated to guys like that, then yeah, you probably got a problem. But I mean, that's not the way it is. And people like to gripe about how many players from Daniel are on the roster. If you really go and look at how many of those guys are actually on scholarship, it's not nearly as many as some people make it out to be. Do we have the appeal for baseball porter players, or will it come down to padding those pockets with NIL? Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of both, to be quite honest. I mean, obviously kids want to get paid. Everybody anywhere else is going to pay them. And, that's the new roster limits coming with that. Clemson's supposed to get 34 full funded baseball scholarships, something they've not had. They've gotten the 11.7. There's no player on the roster that gets a full ride. Every one of those guys is having to pay something out of pocket. So that'll help, that you're able to offer all these guys full rides now. But yeah, you got to have something else to offer them, besides just the appeal of playing at Clemson. I mean, Package has had some success in the portal since he's been here. The guys didn't work out in this year, but the guys he brought in for last year ended up being pretty good. It's all about finding the right ones. And, they just, for whatever reason, man, they didn't work out this year. Maybe instead of looking for guys with 2 or 3 years of eligibility left, he should have been looking for guys that had been already played 2 or 3 years. But it's easy to sit here and be critical of that now. We at the time everybody thinks they're great additions. It just didn't work out. And who knows, again, if we're talking about Priest and Gaffney, both those guys, they were underclassmen this year. They still got some time, but it's a slippery slope when you got to recruit the portal. You got to have the money, you got to have the appeal. I think Clemson's got the appeal part, but you definitely got to have the money part too. Bryce Perry Wright got him. I would. He's not a guy. I don't think so. I've been wrong before, so I'll definitely be wrong again. But I would strongly lean towards him being one of the guys that continues to take visits. That's just kind of been the way this thing's gone. But he has by far visited Clemson more than anywhere else. If I had to sit here and make a prediction today, I would probably say it's going to be Clemson. That's why I said earlier at the top that I think there are going to be several guys that attended this weekend that end up being a part of the class. I just don't know that there are going to be several that pop off immediately. Sometimes we just got to let it play out, and he might be one of those guys. Is Tom Weidman's son a legit transfer opportunity? Looks like a potential great outfit. I haven't heard anything about any potential incoming transfers yet, so I can't answer that. I saw Qualk's tweet today, but that's all I've seen. I hadn't heard anything outside of that. I don't even know much about him. I remember his daddy playing basketball at Clemson, but that's about it. Kevin O'Sullivan went full Karen mode yesterday. We saw that side of him last year in the Super Regional. Some of the old guard at Clemson loved Sully because he was a coach at Clemson under Leggett. But, man, he has shown his true colors time and time again. When a guy shows you who he is, believe him. Man, did I love the Coastal coach just ripping into him in the press yesterday. Speaking his mind. We don't get enough of that anymore. There's too much coach speak, in my opinion. You go back to Eric Bakic's epic run comments. That 100% coach speak, man, and people are killing him over it. What's he supposed to say? Yeah, we're going to suck the rest of the way. But, yeah, kudos to that Coastal coach over there, man, for having the gumption to speak up and do the right thing. And Sully should have been suspended minimum. It's one thing to go off on the official. Man, we talking about a game getting moved back an hour. Come on. An hour. It's one thing to go off and get heated with one of the NCAA reps or somebody like that, man. But when you start mouthing off at the players and one of them being, an amputee who's really not even on the roster and telling him to shove the whiteboard up his ass and stuff. And it went way deeper than that too, but there is there's no place for that in college sports, man. You are supposed to be a leader of men, developing boys into men, and that's the example you're setting. I got no use for that guy. None. Cam's body language changed when Bell. I thought Cam came into yesterday's game trying to do too much. From the jump, I thought his body language was kind of the same through the first half of the game. I thought until it started getting out of hand, anyways. And I thought he looked like a guy that knew he had given everything he had Saturday night in that game, and it still wasn't enough. And he comes out yesterday and tries to do even more. That's what I saw in Cam yesterday. I know we were banking on Bell and Dane to be starters, but those are two unproven guys. I don't know that you can bank on Moeller being a starter to start the season. He just had Tommy John surgery the week after, or either 2 weeks after the season started. So I wouldn't expect him to be a starter when he might not be fully ready to roll till April, especially knowing how cautious this staff is with those guys coming off Tommy John. So yeah, you got Knock, you got Talon Bell, who hopefully will go to. That's a guy that I think is going to be really good. No, we didn't see a lot of it this year. I think he's a guy that's really he started behind and never caught up. But hopefully he'll go. My preference would be to the Cape this summer. I think he still kind of needs to develop an out pitch, and if he can do that and kind of add a little velo before next year and kind of get back to full strength, I think he'll be fine. But yeah, you have him and Canuck. But yeah, you still need another starter. Again, I can't remember the pitchers that they signed that will be incoming freshmen next year. But I don't know that any of them were guys that are going to be starters day one. So yeah, you probably do need to go get one out of the portal, because I think Titsworth's a guy that's probably more valuable out of the bullpen than he is in the rotation. I say the same thing about McGovern. Preferably you go find yourself a flamethrower, because that's one thing they haven't had. Has anybody asked me about any shades after the OVs this weekend? One pair went out last night, another pair went out today. But no, you're the first to ask. How about Vanderbilt in Texas losing one? There's been a lot of regional hosts get beat this weekend. I mean, Clemson's far from the only one. The SEC did not have a great opening weekend, man. All those host sites they had, and they've had a rough weekend. Vanderbilt being first and foremost the number one overall seed in the country, going down. Yeah, it's I think it goes to show you just how much parity we have right now. It's been a fun weekend, man. I haven't gotten to watch a lot of it because I spent most of the weekend in Clemson, or at the ballpark in Clemson, so I didn't get to see a lot of it. Like even when Clemson played the late game Saturday, I was there early. I was at the ballpark all day long. I was at the ballpark all day long Friday. By the time I left out of there yesterday, it was 6:00 and I was sick of baseball. But yeah, I have watched a lot of highlights and seen the scores and stuff, man. There's been a lot of upsets this weekend. A lot. All right, we got to wrap this thing up. We at 90 minutes. With Team 127, you felt like you always had a chance. I mean, always with Team 128, it felt like the opposite. You start getting whooped at any moment. With what we have, 45 wins is a good season. Yeah, last year you didn't feel like those guys were ever out of any game. And I kind of felt like this about this team until about the halfway point of the season. Then kind of some of the warts started to show because they had they had some good comebacks early on in the season. They almost had one there in Tallahassee one time late in the season. But yeah, I get what you're saying here. Yeah, I mean, you've got a valid point. The deeper you got into the season, man, the more teams that kind of figured out, hey, if we don't beat ourselves and we make these guys earn everything, we got a really good chance to come out on top. And I think we saw a lot of that, going back to, starting about the time they went to North Carolina State, to be honest. Because North Carolina State that weekend, that's the kind of game plan they had, and they executed to perfection. They didn't hardly walk any Clemson hitters that weekend. Their guys just went out there and were throwing strikes. I think they only used like 6 or 7 pitchers all weekend long, if I'm remembering right. And they didn't issue a lot of free passes, and Clemson had trouble scoring. And that was kind of the theme most of the rest of the way. Darius Gray, I would say Clemson's a long shot with him. I think Clemson's going to take 2 more offensive linemen. I think one of them's already in the bag, so you're looking at one more, and I would lean towards that one being Carter Scruggs. But we'll see what happens with Scruggs there. I know they really made an impression on Dalton Toothman this weekend, and you still have the Turk kid that's coming in later on in June. But the 2 at the top of the list for me would be Delaney and Scruggs. Bench Grice and ran Amick off in one move. That's actually not true at all. I know a lot of people think that when Bakich made that move and he did the double switch and ended up taking Amick out of that game, that's not what did it, man. That deal had been sealed long before that. Long before. And I'll never forget that day that it finally became public that he was going into the portal. It was Father's Day, and Amick's daddy was on the radio that morning. I think it was Mickey Plyler's show, talking about how much they loved Clemson and would never leave and yada, yada, yada. And a couple hours later, it hits, he's in the portal. But what happened in that Tennessee game, that had nothing to do with that. That deal was done. What happened to Chase Kick? Nothing happened to him. He's just not ready. He pitched the third of an inning against Florida State. He gives up 5 runs on 4 hits. Before that, he pitches an inning and a third against Coastal Carolina. 2 runs, 2 hits, 2 walks. One of those hits was a home run. He gives up 4 hits and 2 2/3 against the Citadel. Before that, he had 3 appearances where he gave up just a hit and no runs. But, right before that, he gives up 5 runs on 6 hits to Winthrop. His ERA is 9.75. His whip is off the charts. He's got 5 walks, a hit by pitch, so 6 walks and 19 hits. That's 25 walks and hits in 12 innings pitched. I heard Becerra was going to the port. I haven't heard anything about Becerra, but I mean, I feel bad for the kid. You know, it doesn't matter where he plays next year. He's hurt. He just had Tommy John surgery. Um, I don't know that he's going to play anywhere next year. Canarella arm was a topic on the Roar today, saying the arm is still not back and that it'll hurt round one game. We'll see. I don't. Again, everybody's got their opinions, man. I just don't. I don't remember Canarella ever having that, some rocket of an arm. I don't think it's all that much different than it was. I'm not saying it's the exact same thing that it was pre-surgery. I just don't think there's that much of a difference. What kind of money is Cam Canarella? I can't tell you what kind of money Cam Canarella is making. I mean, I don't have any idea. But no, it's not like college football where kids are going to start staying. Cannarella's not staying. That's done deal. It's done and over with. There's zero chance of him coming back. Guys have much more leverage going into the draft as a junior than they do going into the draft as a senior. But there's zero chance Canarella comes back. Backett was already talking about him in the past tense yesterday. Look at his reaction yesterday after that game was over. It tells you all you need to know. So it's not just about money with him. But no, Clemson does not have the kind of NIL money that they could pay a baseball player to come back and come close to paying him what he'd make as a first round or second round draft pick. Yeah, nah, they don't have that. Back to Canuck, having 5 people pitches and being able to actually throw them for strikes is 2 different things. Still a fastball changeup guy. Felt better. Teams eliminated the fast. He was not just a fastball changeup guy last year. So I mean, the guy was throwing 3 strikes for pitches all last year. Pitching coach is the problem. FYI. Yeah, well, we'll agree to disagree there. I mean, the guy, I mean, how's he have so much success elsewhere? But, once he gets to Clemson, he forgets how to coach pitches. Wonder why he was let go from FSU. They hired a new coaching staff. And are you 100% sure that the new guy wouldn't have retained him? Do I see staff changes on Backus' staff? I lean towards no. At least not with the top guys. I don't, unless Bellinger decides he wants to move on and gets an offer he wants to take. I mean, I don't see anybody getting fired. No. Same thing with Schnabel. I think he's going to end up being a head coach at some point, but he's been with Backus forever. Backus not firing that guy, and I don't think he should. I mean, again, like I said earlier, I'm not on the fire the coach's bus, man. I still like Bellinger. I think there's and I probably shouldn't even say this because I'm not gonna detail what I mean, but I do think there are some areas that need to be looked at that might possibly need to be addressed, but it's not with, Baggage or Schnabel or Bellinger or Mazer or any of that stuff. It's other things that go on inside the program, but that's about all I'm gonna say about it. But I mean, I'm not saying it's all, they're sitting around campfire singing kumbaya every day. I mean, I'm not saying there's no issues. I think there might be a thing or two that needs to be looked at and that kind of goes beyond who the coaches are. And I'll leave it at that. Last one is Fitzgerald, the wide receiver, a Clemson take. Oh, 100%. You don't offer. He just got offered Friday. You don't offer him Friday if he's not a take. So yeah, they would take him in a minute. You've already got 3 wide receivers in the class. I think I might have talked about this last week. I can't remember, but the way things are kind of going these days with the money and the 20.5 million cap from the rev share and stuff, you have to kind of start treating this like you would an NFL roster with a salary cap. So you have so much money designated to pay out to this position, or to freshmen, sophomore, however you decide to do it. Well, Clemson's already got 3 receivers committed in this class. So you got to, it's pretty safe to probably assume that they're not going to dish out a ton of money to add a 4th. That's why you see a guy like Craig Fitzgerald getting scratched from the official visit weekend. Not saying Sedarian Morgan was scratched because I think he's probably the exception to that he's probably a guy you take regardless and work it out however you can work it out. But all that to kind of say that the 4th take is going to be a guy that's not going to cost you an arm and a leg as a freshman. And, despite Fitzgerald's pedigree with his daddy and stuff, he probably fits into that category. But yeah, he's 100% a take. You don't offer him Friday, and him not be a take. Does Clemson have a dedicated batting coach? Schnabel and Baggage are the hitting coaches. All right. I want to thank everybody who tuned in tonight. I thought we'd have a banger tonight, and we did, which we tend to do most weeks. I want to thank our sponsor, A-Glass, for when you need a glass. Call my buddies over at A-Glass. Stan, Michael, call up there and ask for Chandra. She can give you all the scoop, or if you just want to go online, get yourself a free quote there, myaglass.com. 2 locations, one in Florence, one in Sumter. Thursday night, the final baseball show of the season. We'll do our state of the Clemson program show, whatever we're going to call it. Postseason wrap up or season finale, whatever you want to call it. But Ashby and myself be here Thursday night, 7:00, right back here next Monday. And I am going to go out on a limb and say we will have at least 1 new commit to talk about by then. Until then, y'all be safe. Appreciate everybody tuned in. Check us out at the site, ClemsonInsider.com. And if you have not hit that like button on YouTube, please do so. And same thing for that subscribe button. Next Monday, 7 p.m.